Oh yeah. So for step 6, we're going to charge the chassis battery. And all it's showing you is plugging it in and charging it up. Well, there is mine. This is an older battery, but it is a 7.2 volt pack that we're going to use in the Grasshopper. And we're going to use this to test out the radio gear to make sure that the servo and everything is exactly where it needs to be. Because if the servo wasn't shipped properly, putting all of this on, if you put it on first and then you plug it all in, the servo could move and then it's not center anymore, which is why they want you to test out the radio gear. So we've done step 6 and now we'll do step 7. So I'll pull out the radio gear that we're using for this and set it all up. So this is the radio that I've chosen for the Grasshopper, which is their Futaba 3P-RKA. It is a very basic radio, and when you open the kit, there's your radio. And it comes with the on-off switch that you'll put on the car, your receiver, and then this little tool, which is a separate thing to the car itself. And the radios do not come with servos or speed controller. So I've chosen and purchased this one, Futaba 3004, that we're going to use for the Grasshopper. So this is all going to get plugged into this, as is the speed controller that came with the kit. So this ultimately is the radio that we're going to use for the Grasshopper. So I'll set this all up so we can do our initial testing. So let's actually open the box for the servo at this point. And you'll notice that the servo itself comes with a servo horn already. Tells you what the Futaba model is. And then there's a bunch of servo horns, screws, etc. that are part of this. Now, depending on the car, depending on the radio that you're using this with, all of these pieces are going to change depending on what the car is that you're using them for. But if you notice here, there's other pieces that they want you to put onto the servo. So technically what comes on the servo is not going to be used. And in fact, this is what was in the kit for the Grasshopper. And these are the pieces that you're going to be using for the servo. So it means I'll be removing all of this from the servo to use what actually is needed for the Grasshopper, which you can see. And these screws and whatnot, they're showing you that there's step 7 and which screws that you need. So I'm just going to put those pieces, or at least pull those pieces together, get them off the tree, and then we'll attach the battery, make sure that this servo, the actual servo piece here, which you'll see when we get this off, is centered, and then we can install these pieces. We just have to make sure it's centered first. So there you see, there's the actual servo, which it kind of moved as I was unscrewing it. So I already know it's going to be off center and we'll need to center it again once it's plugged in. So I've pulled off some of the pieces that I need for the servo saver. And then there's one more that I need to get off of here, which you can see says P5, P6. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So if you look, and I don't know if you can see this, but this one says Seiya and Seiya or Seiwa. This one says Futaba. And that's the one that we want, which is why they're showing you this, because if this wasn't a Futaba servo that you're using, you may have to use one of these other ones. So you want to be sure to make sure that the tree that's in the Grasshopper kit, you're grabbing the right servo saver so that it knows, you know for sure that this is the right servo saver for your servo because it'll fit nicely on it. So I just need to get this one off. And then what I'm going to do is now clean up all the burbs again on it so that don't have all these, all this plastic sticking out. I'm just going to clean that up and then we can continue. So you can see here that for step 7 in bag B there's a BB1 tapping screw, and in bag C there's a BC3 tapping screw. However, depending on the radio, you're going to end up picking one or the other. So if we go back to step 7, at the very bottom it's showing if you're using the Futaba radio you need the BC3 tapping screw. If it was the Sanwa you need the BB1. Well, we're using the Futaba, and I've already done the pre-measure, making sure that that screw is correct, which it is. So we're using that tapping screw, and then all these pieces we're going to put together and then put it on the servo. So let's unpackage the speed controller. We're going to need this now. So there is your TBLE O2S Tamiya speed controller that came with the Grasshopper. And this actually has the on-off switch built into the receiver or into the speed controller. So the one I showed you earlier that's actually in the radio kit, we're not going to be using. This is what we're going to be using for that. So I'll get this all set up and we can start plugging it in. So because we're getting closer to putting it all together, let's just do a quick run through on the manual, and I just want to get through to this part here because what it's showing you, some of the kits come with specific servos, and we've picked I've picked a 3004 as the servo we're going to use with this because some of the kits used to come with the servos already. So you can see the receiver. It shows you there's the little LED, and then 3 is a channel 3 servo, 2 is a throttle servo, 1 is the steering servo, and then B power connector. So for this, we're going to be plugging in the steering servo into slot 1, and the throttle servo, which is going to come from the ESC, is going to go into slot 2. So that's how you know which slot to put things in. So steering servo slot 1, throttle servo slot 2 from the ESC, which we'll do. Now, if we look a little further, you can see that there are some instructions. It's telling you that you need to put in the batteries, and of course this LED, if it blinks, we need to charge the batteries because it's almost dead. But then it's showing you the if it was on your electronic speed controller, what this is supposed to be used for, etc. And there's some general guidelines. So you can see here receiver and servo connection, how to actually put it together, which we've kind of just figured out. So just basic installation things about this, and then how to use the trims and whatnot. But I'm not going to go through the whole radio in terms of how to use the trims yet, but we might do it a bit later in this the instructions here. So one of the things we're going to need to do right away is put the batteries in the transmitter, and the batteries go into the bottom of the controller, and it takes 4 AA batteries. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Put that back on. And then here, if I was to turn it on and the on-off switch is on the back, you've got the solid red glow of the light. Now that just means that we have power. So the transmitter itself is ready to go. I'll just turn it off for a minute while I plug in the rest. So there is our servo. We know that it's the steering servo, so we need to plug this into slot 1. And you can see the little notch on the servo. I don't know if you can see it, it's kind of small. There's a little notch. Well, that's how you'll know whether this is going into the right part, because you can see the notch on the left-hand side. So just make sure that I've got the notch correct, and we're going to put this into slot 1. So that is now solid into slot 1. Then the throttle, as we can see, is going into slot 2. So we'll take this cable here, and same thing, make sure that we've got the right one, and we're going to slide that into slot 2. So both those are now in solid. So we've got it, we're all set. Now, just as the instructions show, the transmitter should be on before the car is turned on. Well, all we've got is a bunch of parts here, but the same thing applies. So I'm going to turn the transmitter on. So I'm just going to make sure that this is showing off, which it is, and we're going to plug in the battery. And now I'm going to turn this on. Now what you should see is that the servo should go back to neutral, which it did. So now that the servo is neutral, we can install the servo saver in the correct position that they were talking about, and showing you how to put on all of these plastic pieces, because without the servo in neutral, they'll all be attached wrong. So that's why they want you to power it all up and make sure that it is neutral. So now we can move on to the next step. So looking at the servo, see where the wire comes in? We know that we need to install these items so that they match that correctly. So always make sure that in terms of the alignment of this, it's going in where the wire is coming out. Don't flip this the other way and put it on. It's not going to work. You need to make sure it's that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and screw those things into the servo. So you can see here that they're showing you that the servo saver is completely at a 90-degree angle. And I've attached the servo, and you'll notice that it is not at a 90-degree angle. And there's nothing I can do about it in one sense, because you see how the servo is ribbed. When this piece fits on, it fits into the ribs. Well, it's not perfect because this doesn't sit in neutral in the right way that needs to sit over top of it. But it doesn't matter, because on your radio, you'll see at the top it says steering. That is a trim. So what I'm going to do, and just so you can see this, is there is the servo. We're going to have, let's say we're going to have this perfectly level as much as we can. And I'm going to trim it so that it's level. So now it's at the 90 that it needs to be. And it will still be okay, because as you can see, if I turn this, we still have the same throw and the same movement that's necessary. So the trim has made all the difference, and that's how you can fine-tune this to make sure that the servo is in the right position. If I move that forward, just so you can see I'm moving this at the same time. So the throw is fine. So that's correct. So now that we've got everything set up, we've done the test, we've put the servo saver onto the servo, we know the servo is all in neutral and ready to go, we know that it's at the 90-degree angle, we are all set to move on to step 8, which you can see is putting on the pieces that we're going to need to install the servo into the chassis. So this first part is pulling together all the pieces that we need, the tie rods, the screws, etc., to put onto the servo saver ready for installation into the chassis.